Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. Thank you very much for joining me once again. You are always most welcome. Well, as you probably guessed from the titles and the intro there, it's 55 years since the Apollo 11 first landing on the moon in July of 1969. So I thought we'd have a little talk about it. I have two books. I've got actually about a dozen books on the subject, but two in particular I thought that were worth looking at because they are things I can show you, very picture heavy books, and may whet your appetite. First of all is the Haynes Owner's Workshop Manual for Apollo 11. So if you just happen to have an Apollo 11, you might want to do some home maintenance on it, and this tells you how. Well, I think that's what I thought when I bought it. Anyway, I'm not sure now. It's going to have some very interesting references in it. And then the second book, which is perhaps the most amazing of all the books I've ever seen on the subject, is this huge thing which my wife very kindly bought me at Christmas time, actually. This is absolutely stunning, and it's so heavy it's quite hard to manoeuvre, if I'm honest. And it's Apollo remastered by Andy Saunders, and Andy Saunders is basically a photographer. I'm not sure he took too many of these pictures, I don't think he did, but he's basically taken some fairly grainy, nasty, not very clear pictures, and he's remastered them to make them crisper, sharper, and easier to see detail in, like they do with movies, of course. And it's really, it's so heavy though, it's like Encyclopedia Britannica. This must weigh 4-5 kilos. It's really heavy, proper weight to it. Anyway, I'll just bring you on the back, just show you the back here. This gives you a bit of a flavour for what we're going to see, really. So you can see here you've got the lunar module on the surface of the moon. Apollo 11, I think it's Apollo 11. No, probably not Apollo 11. In fact, one of the later ones, because you can see this is the one where they got the idea for the For All Mankind series, where it's tilted over. Well, that is quite precarious, relatively speaking. Actually, if you look at the angle it's at. So I'm pretty sure that's not 11. That's one of the later ones. I can't remember which one. Some of you watching this are probably greater experts than me. But I would just say this. Somebody made a comment the other day. Was it one of the subscribers? Is it Cyber Leader Andy? I think made a comment and said he was born in '65 and he doesn't remember Apollo. You know, well, I won't go into too many details. But I was born roughly the same time as him, and it's my first memory that I can really remember. So I'd be, I don't know, 4 years old, something like that. And we didn't see it live because it was quite late at night if you're in the UK anyway. Kind of in the morning, I think, the early hours of the morning. But we saw it first thing in the morning, and then we had just got our first television, so it was all black and white. But this really is my first memories I can recall in life, to be quite honest, and it was amazing to have that as your first memories. The man landing on the moon is a privilege, I think, is the way I look at it. And it was amazing times, really amazing times, and. You know, I wasn't aware of a lot of the other issues in the world and the strife that had led up, you know, the Vietnam War, and didn't know much about anything at that age, obviously. But to have that as your intro into life, it's no wonder I've always enjoyed science fiction and science and astronomy and things like that. In fact, I don't know if you noticed that I've actually got my bit of a theme here. I'll zoom you in, not too much, obviously, but I've got my my starry shirt on. Don't know if you can see that with the stars on it. Whoops, helps me get back in the camera. And I also got my moon-themed Dark Side of the Moon watch on as well, which is very much on the theme of the moon. So we're really getting into the spirit of 1969 July here today. So obviously the Apollo mission started on, in terms of the liftoff, was on the 16th, wasn't it? 16th of July, landed on the moon on the 20th. And they were only there for, I think, 3 or 4 hours. Yes, they did land on the moon. I hope none of these conspiracy theories are going to pop up. And something else I just want to say as well before I go into this, looking at it in the pictures and just flicking you through to sort of whet your appetite for perhaps these books yourself. And perhaps to look into it more if you don't know much about it. But this thing about conspiracy theorists and flat earthers and all that. Somebody made a comment, didn't they, last week and said, "Oh, watch out for the flat earthers and conspiracy theorists." Well, there were no conspiracy theorists for a long time, and I really do blame, if that's the right word, I blame the conspiracy theorists for... I'm just put a bit more light on them again. I blame the conspiracy theorists, or rather the blame that created the conspiracies, really I think generates from that 1979 film, Capricorn 1, which stars Elliot Gould and James Brolin and Hal Holbrook amongst others, and O.J. Simpson's in it as well. Sam Waterston, is it? He's in it too. So it's a very good film. I mean, it's a brilliant piece of art, to be honest. I thoroughly enjoyed that film. But it didn't make me go out and then believe that everything I'd seen was all a lie. I mean, it's a fantasy film, you know. It's a what if, isn't it? And at the end of the day, you only have to understand the basics of the way that Hollywood was working then. If you see films like 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was out around about that time, I think, or just after, they didn't have the technology and the ability to make film like they could today and make it look real. And Star Wars didn't come out until, what was it, 8 years later? So the sort of computing technology was not available in the film industry at that time that could have done any credible fakery at all. And I think that, honestly, I cannot recall reading about conspiracies. I'm not saying there weren't any, but it wasn't in popular culture any kind of conspiracy theories about the moon landings at all prior to Capricorn 1 coming out. And then everybody said, oh, you know, and people take things so literally, don't they? It's like, oh, so that, oh. And it was like, and I remember thinking, what, did they think that's what happened? Well, you've only got to, you know, realise that was 10 years earlier, and they couldn't really have done it 10 years ago, even if they wanted to. You only got to see the computing power and the lunar module, command module, come to that. I mean, you know, I've got my ubiquitous iPhone, latest iPhone there. That's got something like 1,000 times the computing power of the spacecraft that landed on the moon. In fact, 1,000 times is probably a conservative estimate, because it wasn't an advanced computer by our understanding of that term today. So when you look back, you know, everything was very much of its time. Frankly, anybody that believes all this stuff about they never went to the moon. Well, if they never went to the moon, why did they go so many times? They wouldn't have gone so many times because they cut it after Apollo 17 because the budget got cut, and they moved on to Skylab and all that stuff. And you can understand it in a way because these rockets, the Saturn V rockets, and of course you'll have seen my own model. We'll talk about that in a second. That was, before any of you will start laughing and chuckling about what a terrible model around, that was made a long time ago. Anyway, we'll talk about that separately. But yeah, so they cut the budget, you know, but if they were going to do a hoax, they'd do it once. They wouldn't keep doing it, would they? They wouldn't keep on doing it because it would just make it more obvious that they weren't really, you know, there would be more and more evidence and all this stuff about the lighting angles and the flags and all that stuff. People will sort of invent their own reality. We're not going to get into that. I just want to talk about the facts today. So, I'm absolutely certain in my mind, I'm very confident and satisfied that man did go to the moon. And there's plenty of evidence. And they actually did some photography a couple of years ago. They was doing some... they had a probe satellite that was flying over the moon, and they actually had some footage, was it still photographs of some of the landing sites, and you could still see the lower landing stages of the LEM, which I thought was fascinating, really interesting, that kind of thing. But of course, they are quite tiny even when you see them from orbit. It's just a dot, really, little more than a dot. And they don't want to do a low flyby, I suppose, because the risks are too high. But there's obviously, so there was how many sites was there? So the Apollo 13 obviously didn't happen because they had a problem. So there's no Apollo 12 or Apollo 13. So you basically got 1 to 7. You got five missions. I think I'm right in saying that. 11, 14, 15, 16, and 17. So there's still quite a lot of stuff left around on the moon, you know, and the lunar rover's still there, of course, and all that stuff. Anyway, let's get into have a look at some of these pictures in these books, and it might just whet your appetite. And I'll talk about my my own experiences with the Revell kit. I think we'll do that one last because it's so heavy. That's going to actually be quite difficult because it's so cumbersome. Just a quick look at this slightly tongue-in-cheek one, the Haynes manual. when it talks about, zoom you in, it talks about Werner von Braun. Perhaps the less said about him the better, because that's not really something to be terribly proud of. But of course he did have a lot of know-how the Americans took when he was captured at the end of the Second World War, but he was a fairly committed Nazi, and that sort of did cause a lot of has caused a lot of retrospective sort of disgust, but things do get revised a little bit anyway, as we know with history. Here you've got the Apollo 11 crew. You've got Neil Armstrong on the left, Michael Collins in the middle, and Buzz Aldrin on the right. So obviously Michael in the middle is the command module pilot, and he sadly didn't get to walk on the moon. I don't think he was too fussed about it. Some beautiful photographs in here. Here we go, there's a quote. Apollo is a grand attempt to reach beyond the world of mundane life and transcend the ordinary limits of human existence through accomplishments of the miraculous. Above all, it was a story of engineers who tried to reach the heavens. Well, they did more than try, that's for sure. There we got von Braun. I'll skip over him because I don't want to promote him or any of his ideologies. And then he goes into sort of talking about the history and the space race between the Russians and the Soviet Union, I should say, and the Americans, the dawn of Apollo. John F. Kennedy, of course, famously said, "We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard." Yeah, and he certainly got that right. And famously, he made this commitment that before this decade is out, men will walk on the moon. Well, they just about made it, didn't they? By 6 months, well, 5 months. Skin of the teeth, you could say. Yuri Gagarin, of course, first man in space. And then there's all the concepts about how they went about the trying to find a way to, because there were so many designs and ideas about how they should go about it. A lot of people wanted a rocket that would fly straight to the moon and land with legs, but they realised that this was not possible because it required far too much fuel, too heavy, and it was easier to have this modular construction with lunar module and a command module, and that's the way they went because it was lighter and it was easier to get it off the pad and get it out into orbit. So of course what they basically do, for those of you that don't know, the basic concept of the lunar missions is they obviously lift off from Cape Canaveral here. Sorry, just got my zoom to work. There we go. It lifts off from Cape Canaveral and it then jettisons stage 1, stage 2. Stage 3 is the one that and then contains the lunar module, command module. And once they are in orbit around Earth, they then do this rendezvous in lunar orbit, where they separate the lunar module, the command module separates, and then extracts, literally pulls out the lunar module. It does a reverse, 180 degrees, and it then extracts, pulls out the lunar module, and they then travel on a set sort of apogee flight path to the moon, and then they use the moon's gravity for slingshotting themselves around the moon. That is the basic concept here. And they use that same effect with a burn, with a modification on their orbit to slingshot themselves back again later. And it's quite clever. I mean, I didn't quite grasp this when I was younger. I didn't quite understand it all because in my fevered childish imagination I thought they just flew there and flew back again. But you just can't do that. You just need so much fuel you'd never get into orbit with the weight that was required. And then here we've got the Gemini Titan missions, which are all basically doing the groundwork and getting ready with sort of developing their technology and the techniques and the training that is needed. And you've got von Braun and John F. Kennedy at Cape Canaveral. That's one of the missile tests. And then we've got Apollo 9's maiden flight. Of course, Apollo 9 was the one that actually went round the moon. Well, Apollo 8 was first, of course, December 1968. And they were racing, you know, they were desperately trying to get these practice missions in to get ready for the big challenge that it was going to be to try and get themselves actually all the way there. There's Neil Armstrong. Yeah, I won't show you every single page because I think it'll just take us too long, but I'm just giving you a flavour here really. But you've got Michael Collins and Buzz Aldrin, Edwin Aldrin. Jim Lovell, of course, was commander on Apollo 8. Commander on Apollo 13, but he'd also been on Apollo 8, He just didn't have much luck, poor old Jim Lovell. He was a brilliant astronaut, no question whatsoever. But he was so lucky, wasn't he? So he went on the Apollo 8 one, which was never going to land on the moon. It was just a practice run. And then the one that he was going to get to land on the moon and search around the Fraumora Highlands, and of course it all went wrong, didn't it? We know that story. Made into a brilliant film by Ron Howard, of course. Bill Anders. Bill Anders, he died recently, I think. I think I'm right in saying that. Forgive me if I got that wrong. We know that who's the other chap that died recently as well? Ken Mattingly, of course, was the original Apollo 13 module pilot, and of course he got the mumps and he got booted out. He was played by Gary Sinise in the film, Apollo 13 film. And then we've got the Saturn rocket. Here we go. And this is the it says here the Saturn V had over 5.5 million parts, working parts. Only 2 went wrong with Apollo 4 launch. That's 99.999% reliable. If a car had this kind of record, it would not go wrong for 100 years. Oh Lord, that's incredible. So says Werner von Braun. Well, we'll skip over it. Anyway, then they've got a picture of all the different launches of the Apollo Saturn V's. So then we get into the Saturn V, and all the different concepts that they had, how it basically worked, size comparisons and how it developed. And of course they have this, they had an earlier Saturn, didn't they? The Saturn, was it Saturn C3? 3. And then the C4, and then ultimately the Saturn V is the ultimate moon rocket, because that's the one that can take the biggest payload. And it still remains today the most powerful machine man has ever invented, with 5 of those incredible F1 engines. And here you've got the Saturn 1B, that's the one I was thinking of. The Airfix, of course, did the kit of this. I think you still get it today, in fact. I think it's still in production. And then you've got your incredible the J2 liquid hydrogen rocket engines. Oof, okay. Here we've got a full schematic of the entire Apollo rocket. And then the first stage, it gets into the stages and how they work. You can see here all the incredible engines with the covers on them, obviously to keep the dust out, etc. 5 F1 engines at the Michoud assembly facility for NASA. Wow. And then here you can see just how big this engine is, isn't it? Enormous. Quite an astonishing thing, really. Quite incredible. I mean, they really were breaking new ground in technological terms when they were doing these rockets. I think that they were truly almost it's like inventing the wheel, isn't it? Almost. This is where they're doing the tests on the actual the rockets themselves. You see the rocket in the test rig there, and then engines for unmanned flights. And there's a comparison between the various different versions. J2, which I think is in stage 2 of the Saturn V. I think I'm right in saying that. And there's a photo here below left. Copper baffles here. Copper baffles positioned on the face of the injector inside the F1 engine bell were used to solve a combustion instability problem. I think that there was a lot of like flame outs and issues like that in the initial testing. And then we've got the second stage, which I think that also has the J2 engines in it. I think I'm right in saying that. Some of the experts amongst you may know a lot more about this than I, but just an armchair expert. There's the second stage there going in, and they have to be assembled in this massive assembly. I was going to say hangar, but it's the assembly building, which is at Cape Canaveral, of course. Is there a photo of it? Did we see a photo just then? Because it is a truly remarkable building in its own right. Don't think they've shown it yet. No, they haven't. Okay, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. And then you've got the third stage actually separating here. You can see it leaving the second stage, and there's lots of video footage of that if you'd like to see. This is something I didn't appreciate when I was younger. The instrument unit is actually in the collar, which was between stage 3 and stage 2, I believe, and all the instruments, telemetry, all the electronics that were controlling the flight were in this ring, basically. This collar that's around the actual sort of waist of the rocket, so to speak. And then you got the Apollo 4, the first full flight of the Saturn V, November 1967. Of course, it's most impressive. This is the actual shot on the right of Apollo 11 on its way to the moon. I mean, it looks like it's on fire, doesn't it? It's quite remarkable, the power of those engines. It's incredible. You know, when you watch the Apollo 13 movie, you watch the Apollo 13 movie, and they do beautifully in that film convey that excitement and the power of that machine. Definitely, if you haven't seen Apollo 13, I'm sure that most of you have, but if you haven't seen it, you really should see. Just watch the takeoff sequence if you don't want to see the rest of it. It's amazing, it really is. I mean, I think it's a truly brilliant film. That I've really enjoyed it when they made that film. I just couldn't get enough of it. Anyway, command and service modules. It goes into the how they all work and how they were developed, what the concept is for the re-entry. You'll have seen this on my rather crudely made kit model. You've got the launch escape tower that sits on top of the command module. And of course this has got the sorry, I've just got my phone dinging now. We'll just switch that off if we can, he says. Whoops, wait a second. There we go, that's off. The launch escape tower, of course, this is the thing that would separate the command module capsule at the front, and it would jettison off, guided by this escape tower in this assembly here, in the event of a disaster. And of course, this is what the space shuttle did not have, anything like this, which is, you know, one of the major flaws with the shuttle, really, wasn't it? With those disasters, especially Challenger, because there was no escape. Whereas on this, there would be escape. They would just press the emergency button, and it would separate, and this tower with its rocket motors, there's 4 rocket motors at the bottom, would blast it away from the rocket that was in trouble, and they would then, once they were well clear, the rocket top to this tower would all separate away, and then they float down on the parachutes, and that's the escape system. Also shows here a picture of the very complex and quite hard to get your head around docking mechanism. Now this is the docking mechanism between the command module and the lunar module, which is critical because it sort of locks onto and then has to extract the lunar module from the actual third stage. Quite remarkable, you know, and when you see it, they did it in Apollo 13, they show it quite well, I have to say, in that film. So again, if like me you struggle to get your head around it, it does make it a lot clearer. And then we get into a lot of the detail in here about about how the command module works and how it splashes down, how it's got the heat shield to protect it, of course. Control panel for the command module, pretty impressive. Gives you an idea just how cramped it is in there. I mean, there really isn't much room, is there? There's enough room for 3 men to sit down and 1 man to stand up. Not at the same time, I should add. Basically that's it, and you can actually see there the position of the 3 astronauts in their cradle chairs within the command module. That's how they sit when they are taking off, and again at re-entry. Quite remarkable. They have a safety harness, very, very sort of similar to a race car sort of style harness that keeps them in the sea. And then there was some pictures here about the concept of the concept of the whole flight, really. So there we go. So then it goes into about how it works, how they have the splashdown with the parachutes and the drop in the ocean, and then they get rescued by, obviously, it has an inflatable ring which keeps the capsule afloat, and then ultimately they get rescued by helicopters. Here is the command module, the actual the module configurations and how it contains all these instruments oxygen tank, gas tanks, hydrogen tanks, etc. And of course this is where it all went wrong in Apollo 13. One of the O2 tanks blew, exploded, did some bad wiring. And there is the whole command module there. You can see it orbiting the moon. It always looks at a strange angle pointing at the moon. But of course they can change their attitude just by using the retro thruster jets. The important thing is the actual orbit that it's in, and its momentum and course is all what really matters. Hand-drawn drawings here. How the life support systems work. What went wrong in the terrible fire of Apollo 1, which was really very, very sad. And of course, Gus Grissom, Roger Chaffee, they both lost their lives. And Ed White, the third guy that lost his life. Very, very nasty indeed, and really shouldn't have happened. I think, again, NASA do sometimes seem to cut corners, and you know, you shouldn't put men into an oxygen-rich environment like that unless you've done fire testing on all the switches, etc., which appears not to have been the case. But anyway, they've got the life support system. How the toilet works. Here we go. Oh dear. Does it show that? Yeah, here we go. Urine hoses, fecal bags, and all that stuff. Yuck! Not the most glamorous way of flying when you've got to do all that stuff. Anyway, we'll move on. And then off to the moon. How it all works. Here's a diagram of the command module. There's Edwin Buzz Aldrin. Man is the best computer we can put aboard a spacecraft, and the only one that can be mass-produced with unskilled labour. Okay. Typical sort of Nazi view of the world, isn't it? Anyway, so there's a cartoon there about the guys floating around MIT, talking about their guidance system, and they had this very clever guidance navigation control unit which worked on gyroscopes. Quite complicated. I won't even begin to try and explain it all because it's way above my IQ, I tell you. But it was very, very clever. And this is the thing that worked, the gimbal lock system. And it's what they call the 8-ball. It shows exactly which direction you're heading in, and it helps you to actually navigate and decide which direction you should be going in. They also had this celestial navigation. And all balls, it's called. An astronaut could actually achieve star position accuracies to 1/100th of a degree by using this system. And basically, it's basically the same idea as using as the old sailors used to use with what's the device? The little device you use on a boat for looking at the stars. My mind's gone blank. Always does this. It's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, does it actually say? It might save me here. Solar glare does cause problems with obviously seeing the stars. It said. It's not a theodolite I'm thinking of, is it? It's a. Oh, if there's any mariners amongst you, you'll be shouting at the screen saying, "You idiot!" I know what it is. It's the thing that looks like a triangle. Yeah, it's got the measurements underneath, and it has like a little telescope or a sight on the top. I've forgotten. It will come back to me, I'm sure. Sextant. That's the one I'm after. Sextant. Yeah, that's it. Anyway, they had a much more advanced version of that, but they could, as long as they didn't have too much glare from the sun reflecting off the moon, they could navigate by stars, basically. The software engineer Margaret Hamilton with a pile of printouts results from the simulations, and it's as tall as she is. Look at that. Oh god, that's crazy. There we go. And then they're talking about the computers that are required, the wiring, rope memory ready for flight. Look at that, rope memory wiring, fine wiring achieved by weavers. I mean, this was before they had silicon. Well, they did have the silicon chip, but it was in its infancy, really. And it just had to be old school wiring. And then you got, there we go. This is the picture I was looking for, really, wasn't it? Jim Lovell using the sextant system. Jim Lovell puts the Sextant star sighting system through its paces during Apollo 8's first flight to the moon in December 1968. So I was right, it was the Sextant. Just can't remember. Earth rises seen from the lunar module. Of course, they famously took some beautiful pictures, didn't they? Was it Bill Anders that took the picture? It was Lovell, Anders, and it's on Apollo 8 I'm talking about now. I'm trying to remember who the other guy was. The captain. Anders the captain? Memory's gone again. I'm trying to rely on my memory too much. Come back to me. Anders, Lovell. No, it's gone. It's gone. I'm sure it'll come back. Lunar module. There's the lunar module. Look at that in flight, a little dot just above the moon. The moon's down there. And there's the module. It's little tiny. It must feel very lonely when you're out in space, you know. And then here's the concept drawings for how it's going to blast off, which of course it genuinely did in the end. The Grumman lunar module. This is how they envisaged it would look on the lunar surface, and that's pretty much what happened. But there was all sorts of other design concepts that were thought of at the beginning. Some of them look very science fiction, like I've got to say. I mean, in the end, it's a very spindly little thing, and as you'll see in some of the photos I'm going to show you later, that it was very thin, and it was actually very, very weak as well, because there was one case where when they had that, from the photo I showed you earlier, when it was a little bit lopsided, it took off at a slightly strange angle, and they got a lot of blast back, and it really buckled the outer skin of the lunar module, the upper stage, the ascent stage. So they call it ascent stage and descent stage. So here's the descent stage, which has got the legs on it, of course, that fold out, and toxic propellants. Yeah, there was one or two problems where they had leaks and all sorts of problems. They were using nitrogen tetroxide oxidizer. Too toxic to be tested near human habitation. So a new facility was built at White Sands, miles from anywhere. Okay, dangerous stuff, obviously. There's a schematic of your ascent stage, and then you can see it's being lowered here, lowered into the testing rig for engine firing tests. I mean, the R&D that had to go on was just constant. It was non-stop. It had to be, I suppose. It had to be. You couldn't have anything that the Grumman guys, for example, they just couldn't have anything that they didn't know would work. And here you can see, actually, in Earth orbit, this is what I was talking about. Once they're in orbit, they have to extract, use the lunar module to then extract by docking into the lunar module itself, using the command module, and that's it there, attached to it, having extracted it. Here we've got the ascent, the Spider ascent stage. Spider? Why do they call it Spider? I think the Spider is what they normally call the descent stage, but anyway. And then you've got the incredibly cramped, you saw this in Apollo 13, how very, very cramped it was. A lot of instruments and computers, but not that advanced, really, not by modern standards of today. So you got Neil Armstrong here looking very chipper, just after his historic moonwalk, so he's got every reason to be pleased. He just made history. And there is his shadow. Yes, it really is Neil Armstrong's shadow on the moon, folks. It's not on a soundstage. Get out of here. And then you've got, I mean, these are the things that couldn't be faked, and this is why I said what I said at the beginning about, you know, conspiracy theories. You couldn't fake this. We did not have the special effects in 68, 69 to do any of this. It just didn't exist. If you see sci-fi films at the time, they were quite laughable in terms of special effects. So yeah. All the pressure suits, how they were tested, that must have been fun. You know, I'm not sure. Look at this guy here, testing the pressure suit. Yeah, I hope they get that right, don't overinflate it, could be in trouble there. And then you've got the life support pack that they wore on their back, containing the oxygen tanks, water, etc., filters, basically everything you need to walk on the moon. It's just incredible, isn't it? Everything had to be, you know, they had to get everything right down to the shoes, soles of the shoes. advert here for ILC Industries. They played in the moon mission. Obviously they were part of the development of the shoes. And then you've got these beautiful pictures, and we'll see these in a bit more detail in the other book. But there is the lunar module, both sections together, of course, on the moon surface, and the Earth appearing above it. Absolutely incredible. And then here we've got some more explanation about the docking, or the system of docking, and how the mechanisms work to enable the two modules to come together. It's like mating, isn't it, really? TV from the moon, and what the bleeps were all about. It's all explained here. How they filmed things. It was fortunate for historians and filmmakers and future generations that Apollo happened when it did. 16mm was still in vogue, and therefore the emergence of the first crude home video cameras whose recordings would have been much poorer quality. Yeah, okay. Home video cameras then at 8mm are pretty bad. The Mauer 16mm cameras used on board the missions were termed data acquisition cameras. And these are the ones that you see taking shots like built into in this case it's the second stage, as it separates from the first stage there. First stage drops away. The intermediate ring then drops away, and they fire up the stage 2 engines, and then, yeah, that drops away. And then talking about beyond Apollo 11, the J-class missions, and these are the missions obviously that eventually got canned because of budget restraints, and the feeling that we'd kind of done it, I suppose, was... But they did get to experiment with things like the lunar rover, so that was actually quite a clever, and generally in terms of technology was quite a simple machine, but had to be reliable. So because if you're going to drive a couple of miles, you can't really walk a couple of miles on the moon. Zero gravity, it's quite hard, and it would use up a lot of oxygen, potentially endangering the crew. So these things all had to be sorted. Here we've got the Apollo flag. The flags were stretched out along wires running through the top to display them properly in the vacuum, as captured here on Apollo 17. That's the last one. And then, of course, the famous shot. The flag gets blasted at takeoff. Dust is scattered by the lunar module and tower as Apollo 14 ascent engines, but drops to the ground immediately once the force is removed, as there is no air to hold it in suspension. Oh dear. And then that's kind of it, really. That's the end of the book. So that's your Haynes Haynes manual. But you will, if you buy that and get a copy of this, you will learn a lot. It does explain it all in fairly simple terms for the average sort of layman like me. Then we come to something that's completely different. This is really art now, and I'm going to put the other light on and get it to work. Yes, there we go. Because this one is going to be quite difficult to show because it's so difficult to handle. This is the very, very beautiful book indeed, and £60 retail it was, 60 UK pounds. That's about, what's that? About $90, sort of €85, something like that. It's not cheap, not a cheap book at all, but worth every penny and quite remarkable. So, again, I won't show every page. Some of these photos we've seen already, but it's the way that they have been remastered and the quality that's been achieved in doing that is really something. And it goes back to talk about, to zoom you in for this. You'll have to bear with me here because it is very hard to show on camera just because it's so physically big and heavy. So here we've got the Gemini, some of the original Gemini spacewalks going on. In this case it is saying that Alexei Leonov was the first one to perform a spacewalk, and this is actually Ed White, who sadly of course was killed in Apollo 1, but it's Ed White doing the spacewalk here, doing an EVA, extravehicular activity. And this is Ed White again. He looked a little bit like, is it just me? He looks a bit like Brad Pitt, to be honest. A little bit of a look of Brad Pitt about it. So sad that he was lost, because he was clearly one of the talented astronauts of his generation. There's the Gemini capsule. You can see this is going to be more difficult than I thought because of the lighting here. I think I'll zoom back a little bit here. How's that? There we go. You can see the Gemini capsule there, So we get a lot of reflections, it's just the way it is. And then, you know, it just goes into all these early forerunning missions, and then we get into these photos I did just allude to earlier. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the cover off this book, because I think it would make life just a little bit easier if I remove the cover. It's definitely going to get damaged if I don't. It's just handprint things anyway. Let's just take that away. Because I think that will make life a little bit more easy. Whew, there we go. So, where was I? I can see it's going to be nearly impossible to show this in the way I'd like to, but it gives you a flavour of the sort of quality of the images and how they've been restored. I mean, look at this one here, the surface of the moon. Look at that. That's absolutely incredible. It looks like a model. It's just tantalising. This is Apollo 8, of course, the first guys to go up. Here you can see the third stage of the Saturn V with the lunar module clearly. In this case, lunar module was not present because they didn't need it on Apollo 8, and the command module simply left. And it's quite funny actually, this photograph, I just realised straight away that that's quite funny because it shows the Florida takeoff site in the background, looking right down at Cape Canaveral. Isn't that amazing? That, and then they're in orbit by this point. That's quite incredible. Yeah, I think I'll just flip forward now and go head up onto the actual moon landings themselves. Because I say there's so many pages, it's got about 300 pages I think. And it's well worth a look. Well worth a look. So, again, in terms of the restored nature of the quality of the images, you can certainly see just how striking that is. So you're looking from the lunar module, you're looking up at the command module, and they're obviously doing a spacewalk there. This is on, is it Apollo 8? Well, it's the 669. So this is actually Apollo 10, I think. Jack Swigert, who of course was on Apollo 13. He was the command module pilot on Apollo 13, the one that was the single guy that was shown to be a bit of a womanizer, played by Kevin Bacon, wasn't it? And then we've got these amazing pictures. Now here you've actually got them where they really are practicing now. And this is Rusty Swigert. Rusty Swigert, oh, that's Jack Swigert. I think they call him Rusty as a nickname. Jack Swigert has taken this photo from the command module of the actual lunar module, still within the third stage, which is absolutely incredible. Fantastic shots, you know. And when I was trying to remember the names, let's just get to that. So I just want to clarify and give credit to these guys. Apollo 7, Apollo 8 we're interested in. We know it was Jim Lovell, Bill Anders. Who's the gentleman I can't remember? His name. Here we go. Frank Borman. I knew he was the commander. Frank Borman, of course. Got there in the end. And then we get into some quite astonishing photos, internal shots. We've got pictures here of the lunar module in Earth orbit. We're doing all these practice runs, getting ready for the big one. Apollo 10, Gene Cernan, and Young, Charlie Brown. They all have these nicknames. John Young, sorry, Gene Cernan, and Thomas Stafford. Look at that. And it all looks very, you know, lots of rivets, and it all looks a bit homemade, doesn't it, when you see it up close? Absolutely incredible stuff. And they're doing the final runs, they're doing the final practice manoeuvres above the lunar surface. Apollo 10 isn't very well known about, because I don't think they publicised what they were doing so much, because they were wanting to not make it look like they were doing repeated practice runs, but they needed to, of course. They had to. And then you get Gene Cernan. He's the guy that took Earthrise. A very famous picture, of course. Earth coming up over the surface of the moon. And then you've got some wonderful pictures of these different craters and quite remarkable images, really. Absolutely stunning. Apollo 11, this is the big one. And then, you know, again here you can see, I'm going to zoom in a bit for this one. If you look very closely, you can actually see what I was saying about the slightly, the fabrication of the actual, the lunar module there. It's the skin of it looks quite thin, and you can see the sort of rippling in the metal, quite remarkable. And they say that in some parts it was no thicker than some thick tin foil, frankly. Because outside the pressure capsule, the inner pressure capsule, it didn't need to be thick because it wasn't going to fly in any atmosphere. It didn't need to be aerodynamic. It didn't need to have any great thickness. And then we got a little bit of a solar eclipse going on here. July the 19th, 1969. That's just before they arrived at the moon. Flew into the shadow of the moon. Wow. Another shot of Earthrise, this time taken by Buzz Aldrin. Took this one. Look at that, isn't that cool? You can just see, it's the Pacific, isn't it? You can just see Australia, I think, here. So you're looking actually at the Pacific. It's an angle where the world is sort of tilted on its side, relatively speaking. Although they are. Obviously that sort of angle over the moon. And then you've got these amazing craters again they've taken pictures of before they set off for their lunar descent. And this is when they actually do set off for the lunar descent, and down they go. They had this problem, was it 11:02 alarm, was it, when they had the problem with the descent? When there was an issue with the onboard computer alarms. One was warning them they're running out of fuel. And it says here, long and tense descent with overloaded computers. Don't know why they were overloaded, but that just tells you the limitations that they had. And they ignored these alarms. They just went with it, went with their instinct, you know. Does it mention what the alarm was? Just looking if it mentions it here or not. It doesn't seem to mention it there. And then finally they have the famous contact-like shot, and then they are literally, the Eagle has landed, they're on the moon. There you go. We copy you down, Eagle. Got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again, that famous quote. And then you get these shots of Neil Armstrong going down, taken by Buzz. And then here we've got Neil Armstrong took this picture of Buzz as he's about to descend the ladder, just about to leave the airlock. Just see the back of him with his pack on. It's quite small, isn't it? The access hatch. Not a lot of space. That's a wonderful shot there, actually. A picture of Neil Armstrong taken by Buzz, and you can see his face. You can actually make out his face. And then of course we've got some shots that some of you will be very familiar with, including the famous plaque that was on the leg of the lunar module that remains there today, of course, to this day. It says, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind," and it's signed by the 3 astronauts and President Richard Nixon. Well, less said about him the better, really. Rather a controversial president, wasn't he? Anyway, politicians, what do you expect? And here we've got them doing all sorts of testing. What's he doing here? Solar wind experiment. They're trying to test the effect of solar winds, thermal energy. And then we've got the famous shot of him with the flag. And the footprints are really impressive when you see them like that, aren't they? Absolutely amazing. Yeah, to see. And then, again, you've got these, because he's enhanced these photographs, the author. If you look at this, you can really see here, again, you can see Neil Armstrong's face. You can just about recognise him, it's incredible. And then over here we've got the famous boot print. And yeah, then we get some just absolutely incredible photos. And I actually had the one you're about to see now. I actually had on my wall for about 3 years in my bedroom wall. That was the sort of defining moment of mankind going up a gear, I think. And I say, some people had Lamborghinis on the wall. I had Neil Armstrong with this poster of what exactly as you see it there, taken by Buzz. I'm right, aren't I? Or is it the way around? It's by me. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. It's taken by Neil Armstrong and it's Buzz Aldrin. You can see Neil in the reflection, of course. And it's become absolutely iconic, that photograph. It really has. And then you get these wonderful shots. And I said about how shonky that the lunar module could look in places. Well, here's another example of it. If you look very closely at this, look at those panels. You can see the Earth above it as well. But look at the non-matching panels and the gaps. It's absolutely incredible, really. You know, I mean, looks like they're actually screwed together rather than welded for access, I suppose. But don't they look a bit shonky, you know? And then there's the lunar module, one of its legs with the pad legs that sits on the surface, surrounded by insulation foil, of course. And again, you can see again it looks a bit shonky in places, especially on that back panel. And the welds look a bit iffy as well, you know. But it did its job, didn't it? It was designed to do a job and not to do anything else, really, I suppose. Just zoom you back a bit. Really wonderful panoramic wide-angle shot there. And I say, they only spent 3 or 4 hours, and then before you knew it, it was time to go, and here they are, they're off. Taken by Michael Collins, and you can see the inverted, just about make it out, can't you? The inverted ascent stage of the lunar module coming back up. And again, there's some great video footage of this, and you know, there's no way you could fake that for all the money in the world. Not back in '69, I'm afraid. So all the theorists with their conspiracies need to just get over it. Yeah, it happened. Get over it, dudes. Absolutely remarkable stuff. And when you see the way that it works, because there's zero atmosphere. And they fire these little thruster jets to change its attitude, and it's instant, you know, and it just, I guess there's no gravity, so they don't feel any G-force, and it just instantly changes its attitude and its angle, and without any sort of G effect on the astronauts, of course. And then you get this wonderful shot of the moon they took, once they're back up in lunar orbit. Quite remarkable, really. Wonderful stuff. And then they've got this shot of by Michael Collins as they're heading back towards Earth just before they start the re-entry procedure. The Earth is getting really bigger up there, he says. Getting ready for the re-entry and the crew and their homecoming. A truly historic event, you know. Anyway, the rest of the book, predictably, it goes on to talk about Apollo 12. Charles, Pete Conrad, Richard Gordon, Alan Bean. And then I'll just flick through these now because it's not quite as perhaps historically important, but some beautiful photographs, as you can see, about their missions. And they went to, so I didn't say that, did I? Where did they go to? They went off to, sorry, I jumped a bit too far ahead. And their target was landing site, the Ocean of Storms. Yeah, the Ocean of Storms. Different part of the moon, different location. Yeah, and there's some absolutely beautiful photographs here. So many, and this time they've got all sorts of telemetry and more advanced equipment. Lunar boot print. Oh, that's a zoomed in lunar boot print. And Apollo 13, well, we all know Jack Swigert, Fred Hayes and Jim Lovell, and we all know what happened there when they had this explosion with the O2 tank causing damage to the lunar module. They had to abandon the idea of landing on the moon. And they had a fairly stressful time having to build the new filters. Fred Hayes got a bit unwell, of course. And yeah, they were very cold. They didn't have any heating, so these guys were having to cuddle each other at times to stay warm. And then you can see when they had the final separation back in Earth orbit, they could tell how the panel had blown out from the O2 tank explosion there. Zoom you in. And this is why they decided not to fire up the... they had to wait rather than hurry back to Earth. They had to take the risk of running out of oxygen because they didn't want to fire up the engine bell on the command module and have a potential explosion. It's a good job they didn't, because it looks extremely likely that could have happened. There's a lot of damage there. It's blown out, especially in that right photograph, on the final shot on the right. It looks pretty badly damaged, doesn't it? And then they were able to ultimately cast it away, shut the hatch. They'd use the LEM as a lifeboat for its oxygen, and then they go back, of course. And then we go on. There's lots and lots of shots. I'm going to zoom you back now. I think we'll just sort of call it a halt there, because it's really for you to sit and really enjoy looking at some of these images of all the different missions, all the different guys and the different landing sites. And it was a very exciting time. We had a promotion in the UK, some of you might remember. I've just mentioned this. There was a big promotion because there was great excitement about these missions at the time, and Walls, the food company, I think are now part of somebody else. I don't know if Kraft bought them or the part of another company, I'm sure. But the Walls company had a promotion on sausages. My dad loved sausages, and he was actually working away in 73, 74. And he would, they used to have this, basically these self-adhesive stickers like the badges from each mission, and he would bring me these every time he came home at the weekend. I mean, worked away for the week, he'd bring me his latest haul of these stickers from the different Apollo missions, from the sausages that he'd been eating. Quite remarkable, quite a funny story really. But there was occasions when he brought the same one twice, and I was, oh Dad, I've already got that one, you know. So you can see his face thinking, I'm going to have to eat another packet of sausages. I think he was living in a temporary flat at the time, up in the north of England, and we were in the south at the time. But anyway, there we go. There's a picture there of the Hasselblad camera. You can actually see the camera that was being used for a lot of these photographs. I had a Hasselblad myself, actually. I used to use it for much more mundane things like wedding photography. But there it is. There's your Hasselblad medium format camera. Does it actually mention it? Hasselblad is looking well. Yeah, it's actually a special one that's been painted suitable for the lunar missions. Quite remarkable, isn't it, really? And then this is the one that I was interested in. This is 71. So this is the Falcon's hard landing as it came to rest on the rim of a 20-foot crater. Yes, you can see the angle it's at. It's not absolutely level, is it? It's quite tilted over. Considering the 6.8 feet per second landing velocity was compounded as the near leg hit first, shunting the spacecraft into an 11-degree tilt with one footpad completely off the surface and buckling the extended engine bell. Oh crumbs, I didn't realise that. Oh wow. The changing shadows can be compared to the stand-up EVA panorama earlier in the mission. Oh, so they had a bit of a tough time on this one, didn't they? So which one was this? This 15, was it? Apollo 15? 71. So this is 15, I think, yeah. That was a really tough landing. That could have been nasty. And obviously that far leg here is the one that's, can't quite see it in that photo, that's clearly suspended in the air a little bit, so they were lucky to get that down, really. Yeah, they really quite lucky to get down safely. Sounds like it was a bit of a challenge. And here's another shot of it, actually. Apollo 15 landing site. Look at it from a distance. I'm going to zoom you in for this. From a distance it looks like it's almost buried itself. See it there? Like it's almost buried itself. Which it has, with its engine bell, has buried itself in the surface. And then over here we've got the lunar rover, the car, electric car on the moon. See, nothing's new under the sun, is it really? Electric cars. Everybody thinks they were just invented yesterday. Not at all. Not at all. All sorts of shots of the shot there of the lunar rover in the distance. Big panoramic shot. Look at that. Incredible. Yeah, well, and there are just more of the same. A lot of fantastic shots of the different missions. This one I wanted to show you in particular. This is when I think this was was that Apollo 17, I think. And it took a lot of force here on the back of the lunar module. The bit I was complaining about looked a bit shonky with the screwed-in non-matching panels. Well, check that out. That's the force of the takeoff on the ascent stage. And look how it's buckled it. Actually buckled it in. It says here, parts of the lem seem to come loose due to the forces exerted at takeoff. They asked Ken Mattingly to undertake a visual inspection and photograph any damage observed. Mattingly replied, "Okay, everything is on the plus, looks clean. Just the surface is a bit flaky with paint." It looks more than that to me. Looks like some of the thermal black. The back end there is pretty badly chewed up, and a couple of panels are torn off. He said. Not kidding. So obviously the good part was around the other side. Isn't that incredible? That's scary stuff. Yes. So it's quite dangerous. Then Apollo 17 is the final mission. This is where these guys. I was wondering what that was then. Apparently this is a pouch of tomato soup. And then you got this lovely shot of the Earth. Definitely need to wind back for this now. I found this really a struggle to show you because it's so huge and it's so heavy. Definitely worth it, I think. And then you get some similar shots. So this is the final Apollo mission. Last time man stood on the moon. Jack Schmidt took this picture. They got down nice and safe. Touched down quite hard. You can see it's gone in quite a way on that left-hand leg, but the right way up. And I think they had quite a big drop at the last minute, from what I was saying. Again, there's some shonky panels. It's like the iffy panels on the back of the module there. All the telemetry and instruments that they've got here being tested. It's quite a nice shot, isn't it? Of the lunar rover on the left and the lunar module with the sun off to the left. And then they did a bit of a spacewalk on the way back, it would seem. And then really it just sort of talks about things like the photography, how the Hasselblad electric cameras worked. Kind of an electric version of the standard Hasselblads of the time, mechanical Hasselblads. And it talks about, photographic objectives and objectives, and how it was all done, and then how some of these photographs were remastered by the author. Some of the work, see some of the changes they made there to try and dial out some of the colour flare and things like that, solar flare, how they did the panoramas, all explained in that wonderful book. Wonderful book. Well, I have to say that just the physicality of having to show you that, the sheer size and weight of it makes it very difficult. But I hope you found it interesting anyway. I think that those Apollo missions were absolutely remarkable. Mankind has never reached that same peak of achievement since, I don't think. To me, I'm not trying to be a grumpy old man here, but we used to have Concorde. Well, in 1969 we had the first flight of Concorde and we landed on the moon. What have we done since, really? Apart from have a lot of silly wars and things, Anyway, I don't want to be getting into politics or anything like that, but it just feels like we haven't progressed too far, really. In fact, I think we're going backwards at the moment in all sorts of ways. Far too much concern about silly things that are really not in the wider scheme of mankind's experience are not very important, and we don't seem to be making those big ambitious leaps in either in technology or in ambition and in discovery. And we had Christopher Columbus and we had Neil Armstrong, These men who discovered completely new worlds, you could say. We've had nothing like that since. So I think it's there's a lot of talk now that we're going to go to Mars. Let's hope that happens. Let's hope that happens. A lot more difficult though, because of the distances. Very difficult for the astronauts, and yeah, has its own unique challenges. But we will see in the future if we manage that or not. Obviously, you've got Elon Musk with his. He's got his own space program going there, and he's been doing very well with it. You know, whatever people think of Musk, he's achieved a great deal. And yeah, let's hope that along with NASA does contribute to a bit of a push forward in the future. I hope so, because I think that mankind needs to think more longer term. I think that there's a lot of short term thinking going on in the world at the moment, and there's no long term thinking really being invested in at all. Everybody worries about the environment. Well, if you're worried about the environment on planet Earth, all the more reason for space exploration, really. Yeah. Anyway, I hope you found it interesting. I hope you'll give me a 10 out of 10 with a thumbs up. He says, flashing his moon watch. And I hope you thought it was interesting, and give me your thoughts about your experiences of what you saw and what your feelings are about the Apollo missions. It was truly mankind's most remarkable endeavour, I think. And we need to see more of that in the future. I think that mankind should have things to aspire to, things to look forward to. And you know, John F. Kennedy was quite right and fully vindicated, wasn't he? The Apollo missions really did. It ended the space race. It kind of hastened the end of the Cold War as well, I think. So it was good on many levels. Good on many levels. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Found it interesting. Thank you very much for joining me. Please stay tuned, for there'll be more interesting videos coming up in the very near future, I trust. In the meantime, stay well, stay safe. Thanks very much for watching. Take care of yourselves. And bye for now. Oh, and by the way, before I forget, I think that Steve's vintage model kit builds, I think he has got a Saturn V that he's working on. I think he's going to be coming along shortly after my show, so don't switch off just yet, because you'll see Steve, I don't know if he's in the chat, but I think he'll be coming along just behind me very shortly, and it's worth staying tuned for that, because I think he'll have some more Apollo goodness for us to enjoy. So thanks to Steve, thanks to you all for watching, take care of yourselves, and bye for now.